10. Judge misconduct. Circuit Judge Cynthia Imperato has admitted to violating the Code of Conduct for Judges by refusing to cooperate with the police. This was from when they pulled her over for being drunk behind the wheel 2 years prior. The judge admitted that she lied to the investigators when she told them that she had only drank 2 glasses of wine at a function for lawyers. In reality, it had been much more than that. During her new trial for the old DUI, she apologized to the officers who she had originally tried to defame. You see, the cops had known she was wasted when they pulled her over, so arrested her anyway and wound it up in criminal court. As a judge, she knew all the tricks to get herself off. She had her lawyers challenge the integrity of the arresting officers while pleading not guilty to the DUI charge. But it came out during the trial that she had tried to persuade the cops not to arrest her by showing off her judge badge, basically saying she was above the law. In the end, being a judge did not help her at all. Her plea deal was denied by the Florida Supreme Court, who put her on trial yet again. During her second trial, she finally admitted what she had done, and now it's looking like she'll lose her job as a judge for good. 9. Conflict of interest. In 2019, Livingston County Judge Teresa Brennan was removed from the bench and given a 6-month jail sentence. Why? Because she lied on the stand, betraying the public's trust. She was brought up that December on perjury charges, as well as charges of misconduct and tampering with evidence. If she hadn't accepted a plea agreement with the Michigan Attorney General's office, she probably would have gotten 15 years in prison. Instead, she only got 6 months. Teresa got into this trouble in the first place because she lied about having a relationship with a state police trooper from Michigan who had been the lead detective in a murder case that she was presiding over. It was a major conflict of interest, especially since she sentenced the defendant to life in prison. Because of the conflicting relationship between the trooper and the judge, that criminal is now getting a new trial and could be released on a technicality. But her perjury goes even further. She had actually heard her own divorce case in court and tampered with the evidence. When getting divorced from her husband, she made a point of being the judge that presided over her own case, which is a massive conflict of interest. She naturally won the case, but only by lying under oath. For all this lying, the judge lost her job and had to hang out with a bunch of criminals behind bars for 6 months. 8. Permanently removed. A judge for New Jersey has been permanently removed from his duties. The judge told the victim of an alleged rape that she simply needed to close her legs to prevent herself from being sexually assaulted. Wow! The gross misconduct and disgusting statement saw Superior Court Judge John Russo Jr. banned from ever being a judge again. In fact, the decision to remove him from his job was unanimous, especially since he had repeated acts of misconduct. The Chief Justice involved in removing John from the bench said that because of what he did, no reasonable victim would ever be able to have confidence in the court system. At least not with him sitting in a position of power. But let's go back to the court proceedings in which the vulgar statement was made. John had been presiding over a 2016 case of a woman who wished to have a restraining order placed against a man whom she accused of forcing her to perform lewd acts on him. After the woman described her unfortunate encounter with a predator, the judge then asked if she knew how to stop somebody from doing such a thing. She responded that she didn't know, and he said to her that the best course of action would have been to close her legs. After this shocking case, it came to light that the judge had been unimpartial in several cases. One of those cases involved a man he went to high school with. He didn't like the guy, so he ruled as harshly as he possibly could against him with obvious bias. 7. Kentucky Three-Way. Judge Dawn M. Gentry from Kentucky is being suspended with pay after one of the most outrageous allegations that can be brought up against anyone. The allegation says that she participated in a three-way in the courthouse. Yes, a three-way. The family court judge had been presiding in Keaton County, but even before the threesome, she had a pretty poor track record. She's been accused of coercing her staff members to work on her election campaign. She's been accused of retaliating against the employees who didn't support her campaign. She's also gotten in trouble for hiring a man whom she was in an intimate relationship with, even though he had no proper experience. She also let her lover, who just so happened to be a former pastor, bring his guitar into the courthouse and sing songs in her office. And while this doesn't seem like a big deal, the other people in the courthouse weren't happy about it because they said it disrupted their workday. But let's get back to the threesome. That's the real juicy part. Judge Gentry allegedly had her male lover and a female court employee engage in some serious NSFW activities in the courtroom behind closed doors. The judge has denied any wrongdoing, saying it's a bunch of hearsay. But considering her track record, she's probably lying. Still, even though she's been suspended with pay, she's expected to get back on the bench in just a little while. 6. Drunk and disorderly. Texas Judge Nora Longoria, 49 years old, was stopped for a measly traffic violation early on a Saturday morning. But when the officers looked into her car, they realized she was very intoxicated. I'm talking wasted beyond belief. And this was on a Saturday morning. When the officers made her get out of her vehicle, she was so drunk that she swayed back and forth and could hardly keep her balance. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, making it pretty obvious she had been out partying all night. But here's the hilarious part. When the officers performed a sobriety test, Nora complained that they were ruining her life. She told them that she had worked hard for 25 years to get to where she was, and that they were ruining her career. But let's get real. She ruined her own career. The judge failed every sobriety test, got emotional, and refused to let the officers handcuff her. She had to be dragged to the police station, where she refused to take a breathalyzer. Now here's where you're going to get upset. After her drunken driving arrest, she had the charge dismissed by the district attorney and went right back to work. She even made a motion as a judge to have the incident stricken from her own record. In the end, she got away with everything and kept her job. How do you feel knowing that a judge can be this ridiculous and break this many crimes without any kind of punishment? Do you think Judge Nora Longoria should be in jail or up on a bench deciding whether other people should go to jail? Let us know your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to hit subscribe. 5. Dragged from the courtroom. A former judge had to be dragged out of a courtroom in Ohio by the police after refusing to go quietly. Tracy Hunter was convicted in court of using her powerful position as a judge to keep her brother from being fired. According to ABC News, Judge Hunter had gotten a little too involved with an incident involving her brother and his government job. Her brother was to face disciplinary measures because of wrongdoing on his part, and she shared confidential documents with him to help his case. When word of what she had done got out, the judge was in serious trouble. She herself then had to go to court, where another judge sentenced her to spend 6 months in jail for unlawful interest in a public contract. But when she heard that she was going to jail, she lost her mind. The deputies came to take her away to the holding cells beneath the courtroom, but she would not go with them. The disgraced judge then pulled the classic dead weight trick. She went completely limp, refusing to budge. The officers had to drag her by the arms out of the courtroom as she went stiff as a board, not speaking and staring off into the distance in complete disbelief of what was happening. But to be fair, that's what happens when you break the law. Tracy Hunter learned the hard way that if you're going to abuse your power, you might just go to jail. 4. Escaping ICE. Newton District Court Judge Shelley M. Richmond Joseph was accused of helping an illegal immigrant flee from Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents who were waiting to take him into custody. The judge, along with a court officer named Wesley McGregor, allowed the illegal immigrant to slip through a back door, thereby eluding the ICE agent who was there to take the immigrant into custody. He has been identified as Oscar Manuel Peguero from the Dominican Republic. He had already been deported twice and had a fugitive warrant for drunk driving in Pennsylvania. He was brought into the courtroom to be arraigned on drug charges, yet the drug and her accomplice let him slip out the back door. If you're wondering why the judge would go through so much trouble, it's because she wanted Oscar to at least get free of his fugitive charges before ICE got a hold of him. If he was able to evade immigration officers until he was cleared of the drug charges, things would have been a lot better for him. So doing exactly what her conscience told her to do, she let him out the back door. But in the end, it didn't go very well for anyone. Oscar was captured a month later, and the judge has been brought up on charges of obstruction of justice. 3. Domestic battery. A judge in Las Vegas was arrested by the police after being suspected of domestic battery. According to Fox News, Judge Stephanie Miley got into an argument with her son after he drove through a yellow light. She was so angry at the kid, she reached over and slapped him across the face, so hard that his lip busted open. And she didn't stop there. With her 8-year-old son in the back seat, Stephanie Miley continued to unload on her older son in the driver's seat. She just kept hitting him for over 2 minutes. By the time the officers arrived at the parked car in the middle of the street, the judge's son was terribly beaten. He had blood all over his face, the left side of his head was red and swollen, and the kid in the back seat was screaming. Clearly, this woman is not a very good person. Who does that to their own son in the middle of the street? After the incident, even though Stephanie Miley was charged with domestic battery, she was never prosecuted. She walked away free and to this day is still a judge in Nevada. 2. Abuse of power. A judge from Jefferson County has been suspended after allegations of power abuse. Circuit Judge Tracy Todd has been temporarily removed from her duties. It happened after a complaint was filed against her by the Judicial Inquiry Commission, with the report being over 100 pages. The complaint says that from between 2014 and 2018, the judge acted with total and unignorable authority. For example, she ruled in 2016 that imposing the death penalty was unconstitutional. Because of this ruling, at least 4 men charged in a series of murders escaped the death penalty. While this may seem like a good idea, what actually happened is that the judge used her power to pick and choose rules that she preferred. Because she was a huge opposer to the death penalty, she did everything in her power to prevent it from being enacted. Anything that she believed wasn't right, she simply tried to change. Judges are absolutely not allowed to do this. They are not supposed to pick and choose what laws they enforce based on their own personal feelings. And as another example, Tracy Todd once asked a man on trial for murder if he had donated money to the political campaign of an old judge who had once been her opponent. In other words, she was trying to determine his sentence based on his political standings. 1. The Profile Judge. The Vancouver police found themselves in a pickle of a situation after they racially profiled the wrong man. It happened when a group of police officers approached retired Judge Selwyn Romilly on the street and arrested him for absolutely no reason. The officers told the judge that he matched the description of a suspect that they were trying to apprehend. The judge at the time was in his 80s, but the suspect had been described as in his 40s. The only thing they had in common was that they were both dark-skinned. Judge Selwyn Romilly happened to be the first black person ever put into the Supreme Court in British Columbia, Canada. He called the incident extremely embarrassing, going on to say that he hopes it doesn't happen again and that the police learn from their mistakes. The biggest issue here, according to some, has to do with the crime of the suspects the police were looking for. They had received reports early in the morning that a man was assaulting strangers, walking up and beating them in the street. The retired judge, being in his 80s, did not look anything like a violent maniac who would be assaulting strangers. He looked like an ordinary senior enjoying his early morning, and yet he was arrested even before the police could figure out who he was.
Number 8. Dead Dolls. Anatoly Moskvin was an unusual kid. He and his friends would wander around cemeteries and look at graves of random people. That's not super weird because people visit their deceased loved ones at the graves all the time. But for Anatoly, this was a seed that grew into something no one was expecting. One of the days that the boys were exploring, they went to the Krasnaya Etna cemetery, where Anatoly saw the funeral procession of a 12-year-old girl. But this wasn't your typical funeral. According to 11-year-old Anatoly, this was a burial ritual. When the people from the funeral saw Anatoly, multiple men in black came over and took him to the body of the dead girl. The men forced Anatoly to kiss the girl's forehead, even though he didn't want to. The girl's mother then put a wedding ring on his hand and another ring on his daughter's hand. This was an experience that would traumatize any kid, even one that was seemingly okay with being around death. It was an experience that pretty much changed the way he lived his life from that point on. He slowly became obsessed with death. This just got worse for him as an adult. Anatoly claimed to have inspected over 750 cemeteries in the span of only 2.5 years. He also wrote a bunch of books, translations, and research papers on various death-related topics. He considered himself a necropolis and also said that he was an expert when it came to the cemeteries in the Nizhny Novgorod region, which is where he grew up. When the death obsession took over, Anatoly started living a life of isolation. One day, police went to Anatoly's flat to question him about something they were working on, because he was an expert and lived in the area that they had been searching. Police weren't expecting to find what they did. They discovered several dolls in his garage. These weren't regular dolls, though. They were made from the human remains of young girls. They found 26 bodies all scattered around Anatoly's house, with some on his sofa and on his shelves. They even found instructions on how to turn human bodies into dolls. When asked why he did all of this, Anatoly said that he felt bad for dead children and thought that he could possibly bring them back through science or black magic. He had been doing this for over 20 years of his life. Anatoly claims that he had never dug up a grave without the permission of the person inside of it. He also thought the spirits of the body would feel more comfortable and appreciated if they were in a warm place where they would be more willing to talk. But since he couldn't just bring bones with him to his house, he decided to make them into dolls. According to Anatoly, he was fully aware that he was committing a serious crime, but did it anyway because he thought the voices of these children needed to be heard. Anatoly was charged with the desecration of graves and dead bodies and given 5 years in prison. A psychiatric evaluation was administered, and it was revealed that he'd actually suffered from a form of paranoid schizophrenia. In 2012, Leninsky District Court said that he was unfit to stand trial. Instead, he was sentenced to coercive medical measures. Number 7. The Backstabbers. On July 5, 2012, 16-year-old Skylar Neese was reported missing by her parents. She had left for work the day before and never returned. This was extremely concerning because Skylar wasn't the kind of girl to just disappear or stay out without letting anyone know where she was. Later in the day, her mother got a call from one of Skylar's friends, Sheila, who told her that Skylar had snuck out with her and another friend, Rachel. According to Sheila, they spent the whole night driving around, getting high, before the girls dropped Skylar off down the street from her home. After getting this information, the police found security camera footage of Skylar jumping out of her window around midnight and getting into a car with her friends. Since she left on her own accord, Skylar wasn't eligible for an Amber Alert, so all her parents could do was wait, and wait, and wait. They waited for months, but Skylar never came back. In January of 2013, Rachel cracked. She felt extremely guilty and admitted to the murder of Skylar's niece. She also revealed that Sheila was in on it. When the police asked them why they killed their friend, both the girls said they were bored of her. After preparing for weeks, the girls drove Skylar to the Pennsylvania border with all the supplies they needed to get away with murder. They ended up stabbing Skylar over 50 times. They decided to bury her body near a tree. After the police found her remains and confirmed that it was actually Skylar's niece, both the girls were arrested and charged with murder, second-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and kidnapping. They were sentenced to over 40 years in prison for their crimes. Number 6. Revenge. 16-year-old Erin Caffey was the typical rebellious teenager that never wanted to go to church with a religious family. She was dating Charlie Wilkerson, who was considered the bad boy of their neighborhood. Obviously, neither of her parents approved of the relationship and told Erin that she needed to break up with Charlie. Erin was furious and started crying, but she agreed to break up with Charlie. But that actually wasn't the case. Erin came to a realization that she would get back at her parents for controlling every little thing in her life. So Erin and Charlie decided to do the worst thing imaginable. They decided to murder her entire family. On March 1st, 2008, Charlie went to Erin's house with his 2 friends and told Erin to come out. They told her that they were going to shoot her parents, but they would need to kill her brothers as well to make sure there were no witnesses. Erin said that she didn't care and told them to do what you gotta do. Her brothers were 8 and 13 years old. Charlie and his friends ended up brutally slaughtering every single person in Erin's family. They thought they would get away with it by lighting the house on fire. But what they didn't know was that Erin's father actually survived being shot several times. He immediately called 911 and was taken to the ICU, where he was treated for his wounds. The rest of the family wasn't so lucky. They suffered from smoke inhalation, which means they were still breathing when the house was on fire. Within hours, everyone involved was arrested, and Charles admitted to the murder. He even revealed that the whole thing was Erin's idea. Erin and Charlie, along with their friends, all received life sentences, with Erin not being eligible for parole until she served a minimum of 40 years. Number 5. Enough is enough. In 1991, a successful 23-year-old model named Omaima Nelson married 56-year-old Bill Nelson. At first, everything was rainbows and sunshine for Omaima. However, things started going south just a few months into their marriage. Her husband became mentally, physically, and sexually abusive towards her. Around Thanksgiving, Omaima had enough of the abuse and completely snapped. On Thanksgiving, she stabbed Bill with scissors several times and beat him with an iron until he was dead. After that, she chopped up his body and boiled some bits and parts. She put his head in the freezer and his hands in a dish mixed with turkey meat. She started panicking and went to her ex-boyfriend's house. She told him that Bill attacked her and she killed him in self-defense. She then told him to get rid of the body and offered him $75,000 for it. Her ex, Jose Esquivel, told her that he would take care of it. But when she left, he actually called the police and told them everything. The police found Bill's remains at their house and arrested Omaima for his murder. She admitted to killing him and was sentenced to 28 years in prison. Do you think her crime was justified? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 4. Two-Faced. Lindsay Hawker decided to take a year off school and go to Japan to teach children English. Little did she know that decision would come at the cost of her life. On March 20th, 2007, Lindsay was heading home from a long day at work when a man approached her. He told her he wanted her to be his English teacher. Lindsay, being creeped out by the random stranger, ran home. But the man followed her home and asked her once again to teach him English. Lindsay ended up agreeing after he offered her $35 an hour for the job. They met a few days later for the lesson at a nearby cafe. After the lesson, the man, whose name was Tatsuya Ichihashi, told Lindsay that he had left his wallet at his house and that she should come with him since it was just a few minutes away from the cafe. She reluctantly agreed. That was the last time she was ever seen. Tatsuya ended up murdering Lindsay at his apartment. He put her body in his bathtub, which he later moved to his balcony. He covered her corpse in a decomposition accelerator and soil. Then he planted some flowers. Lindsay's roommates reported her missing and informed the police of Tatsuya Ichihashi. They went to his apartment and found Lindsay's body decomposing in the tub under the soil, but there was no sign of Tatsuya. Tatsuya went on the run and started changing his appearance with plastic surgery, removing his moles and even cutting off his own lip. But the last plastic surgeon he went to recognized him from media outlets and called the police. Tatsuya Ichihashi was arrested and charged with sexual assault and murder. He was given a death sentence, which is pretty rare in Japan. Number 3. The smartwatch. Jeff West met Kathleen Dawn in 2004, and it was basically love at first sight. Just 4 months later, the two ended up getting married and moved to Las Vegas for a fresh start. Their marriage was great, and they even had 2 kids together. However, things started to go downhill when Kathleen became a cam girl. She charged $15.99 a month, and all of Jeff's friends decided to subscribe. He was constantly being teased by everyone he knew, and Jeff started getting really mad. He wanted Kathleen to himself. He didn't want to share her with the world. He told her to stop, but Kathleen just told him to deal with it. They started fighting every day. Jeff decided he had to get rid of her. On January 12, 2018, the two went on a date. The day seemed pretty good, and they went to bed around 10 p.m. However, the next day, Kathleen was found dead outside her house with a bottle of absinthe. When the police found her, it looked like she got hit by a car, but the police were convinced the whole thing was staged. They questioned Jeff, but he had a pretty convincing story. At one point, the police were basically 100% sure that Jeff was the murderer, but they had no proof. That was until Jeff's smartwatch revealed that he was actually awake during the time of the murder. On top of that, the home security app on the watch also showed that the doors were opened and closed at around 10:53. On November 20th, 2020, after a 4-day trial, Jeff was found guilty of manslaughter and was sentenced to 16 years in prison. To this day, Jeff has not admitted to murdering his wife and still says that he was sleeping when she died. Number 2. Young Blood. Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957 by Betty McCricket, a 16-year-old prostitute. Her mother resented her from birth. The abuse started almost immediately. Betty actually had an older daughter that reported all the horrible things Betty did to Mary. She threw her out of the window and fell 2 stories. By some miracle, Mary survived the fall. Betty even made Mary drink bleach at one point, but that didn't work either. When Mary turned 5 years old, Betty forced her into prostitution. They lived in a pretty poor area, and there wasn't much she could do about it. Having such a horrible childhood, it's no surprise that Mary turned out kinda crazy. To distract herself from everything that was going wrong in her life, she decided to kill people. In May of 1968, 3 mothers went to the police and informed them that Mary had tried to choke their children. However, the police just let it go, since none of the children were seriously injured, and Mary was only 11 years old. And the fact that it was in the 60s probably played a role in it too. A few days later, Mary took a 4-year-old boy to an abandoned house. There, she strangled him to death and just left with a friend, Norma. When the police found his body, they didn't have enough evidence, so they just ruled his death as suicide. Later on, Mary and Norma took 3-year-old Brian Howe to a demolition site and strangled him to death. They also used scissors to cut his hair, cut his entire body, and even mutilated his genitals. On top of that, they carved the letter N, which they later changed to M. At this point, Mary was looking pretty suspicious, and the police brought her in for questioning. Mary was found guilty of manslaughter on December 17, 1968. Number 1. Poisoned. In January of 2020, a 53-year-old South Carolina nurse, Lana Sue Clayton, was arrested for poisoning her husband with eye drops. Her husband, 64-year-old Stephen Clayton, passed away in mid-2018 at a lake near their home. Lana hid Stephen's phone, so he wasn't able to call the ambulance. Lana claims that she didn't want to kill him. Instead, she wanted to make him a little uncomfortable. She also said that she was a victim of abuse and that she was just trying to protect herself. Unfortunately for Lana, the prosecutors didn't believe her at all and thought that she intentionally poisoned Stephen. Stephen Clayton was actually a millionaire, so prosecutors thought she was just out to get his money. Even the judge of the case, Paul Burge, said that her statement didn't make any sense, since Lana could just go to the police if she was actually being abused, or she could have literally just divorced him instead of murdering him. Lana actually told everyone that her husband fell from the roof of their mansion and died. However, the police did a toxicology report, which showed that Stephen actually died from extremely high levels of tetrahydrozoline. It was later revealed that Lana destroyed the will her husband made before she killed him, so that she would get all the money he would leave behind. Lana was charged with manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Number 8. Florencia Elizabeth Ledesma. A pack of dogs brutally attacked 23-year-old Florencia Elizabeth Ledesma last year when she went for a run in the Puerto Rican town of Albardaron near San Juan. She tried her best to outrun these 6 or 7 canines, who continued to bite her as she called her brother Enzo Ledesma and pleaded with him to help her. The call cut off after a few moments. Florencia dialed her brother again, but this time all he could hear were the dogs growling and barking in the background. Enzo, who is a police officer, got on his motorcycle and frantically searched until he came upon the gruesome scene. The vicious dogs pounced on him as well, but he managed to scare them off by firing his gun. By then, Florencia was unresponsive. She died in an ambulance on the way to the hospital from her injuries to her arms, torso, and legs. Investigators determined that the young woman deviated from her normal jogging route while she was attacked by the dogs, who were found to have no owner. Number 7. KARINA VETRANO. KARINA VETRANO grew up in the Howard Beach neighborhood of Queens, New York, where she lived with her parents, Phil and Kathy. She and her father often went running together at Spring Creek Park near their home. One day in 2016, the 30-year-old decided to take a solo run, while her dad stayed behind due to a back injury. Phil told KARINA he was concerned about her going alone, even though the park was just a few blocks away. His worst fears were realized when it got late and KARINA hadn't returned. So he went out to find her and discovered KARINA's lifeless body face down in the weeds, just feet from the running trail. She had been strangled to death. Detectives recovered DNA at the scene, but it didn't match any known offenders. Right as the case started to go cold, police collected a DNA swab from a young man named Channel Lewis. The 20-year-old confessed to randomly committing the murder after an argument with his family left him feeling upset and angry. He later recanted his statement and claimed he was innocent, but he was a match to the alleged killer's DNA. Lewis had also allegedly returned home injured and with torn clothing on the night of the murder and told his parents that he had been mugged. Detectives charged him with murder, sexual abuse, and several other crimes. A local resident recalled seeing the suspect in the neighborhood with a crowbar in hand months before the murder. He also reportedly had a reputation for being a mentally unstable loner with a hatred for women and a history of petty run-ins with the police. The court proceedings ended in a mistrial after a deadlocked jury failed to reach a unanimous agreement in 2018. A second jury found Lewis guilty after a retrial the following year. He was sentenced to life in prison. Many people believe that his confession was coerced and that the investigation was flawed. Some even think that the authorities may have set the young man up in an overly eager bid to obtain a conviction in the high-profile case. Activists are campaigning for the case to be reopened, but for now, Lewis remains behind bars. Number 6. a fantasy unfulfilled. 18-year-old Logan Smith set his sights on a man who frequently jogged near his home in Brevard County, Florida. The teen allegedly spent considerable time planning how to get the victim alone and under his control. He finally made his move in January of this year by approaching the jogger from behind and attempting to strangle him with a waist belt from a bathrobe. Smith soon realized that he had messed with the wrong guy. The victim is trained in martial arts and used his skills to subdue the attacker. He pinned Smith to the ground and called 911, telling police that he was on top of the young man and had his hand around Smith's neck. During the call, the jogger was overheard saying, "You made a very dumb decision." Smith reportedly admitted to the crime, telling deputies that he had planned to drag the victim into his bedroom, kill the man, and then carry out 6 sexual fantasies on the corpse. He's being kept behind bars while facing an attempted murder charge. Number 5. Paul Murphy. While running in the Scotts Valley, California one day last year, local resident Paul Murphy noticed that a house was on fire. He tried to alert the homeowners, only to realize that nobody was there. Using the family's Ring doorbell and surveillance system, Murphy alerted 911 and contacted the owner, Courtney Polito. He showed her the smoke coming out of the house, and soon enough, the fire alarm began to sound. Courtney instructed Paul on how to enter the home and gave him the access code to get inside so that he could save the family's beloved pet dogs, Bunny and a cat. He managed to rescue all the animals, who would have undoubtedly died if the kind stranger hadn't stopped during his jog to investigate and spring into action. Speaking with local station WTHR 13, Courtney said that the fire department told her that the pets would have been gone if they had remained at the house for even 10 more minutes. Courtney's husband Tony told the station that it takes a special kind of person to do what Paul did and risk his own safety to save a stranger's pets from a burning house. It was a first encounter of its kind for the local fire department, according to Scotts Valley Battalion Chief Andrew LaFranco, who told reporters that the department had never experienced an incident involving the use of someone's Ring doorbell to alert 911 and the homeowners. Courtney said that she looked forward to thanking Paul for his good deed and that she wanted to give him a hug. She told WTHR 13 that she planned to take him to lunch or dinner, or to find some other way to let him know that she and Anthony are truly appreciative of his willingness to face danger head-on for a family he doesn't even know. It's understandable that the couple feels this way. If it weren't for Paul, the happy ending to their house fire would be instead a tragic tale. Would you run into a burning building to save an animal? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, hit subscribe. Number 4. Nicholas Day. 2 years ago, a Navy veteran named Nicholas Day was found dead near a county road in Blue Mounds, Wisconsin. Police thought he was the victim of a hit and run until they realized that the man had gunshot wounds and cuts to his neck. He had been brutally murdered while out jogging along the road. A woman who had driven past Nicholas minutes earlier and saw him jogging discovered his dead body when she turned around to grab something that she had forgotten at home. Various clues led detectives to a 21-year-old local man named Riley Berg, who became the prime suspect in what Dane County Sheriff David Mahoney described as a cold and calculated act. Investigators found a bloodstain containing the victim's DNA in Berg's car and established that the young man, who hunted daily, had regular access to guns and knives. He was also spotted nearby around the time of the murder. The suspect and victim did not know each other, but the connections were adding up in a way that pointed towards Berg's possible guilt. Berg reportedly suffers from schizophrenia. His trial was delayed for 2 years while he underwent several hearings to determine if he was competent to stand trial. The defendant himself had gone back and forth on his own opinion of whether he was competent, which may have added to the confusion and contributed to the delay. He pleaded guilty to first-degree intentional homicide with a deadly weapon. The conviction comes with a mandatory life sentence, but he could be paroled after spending 30 years in prison. Number 3. Vanessa Marcotte. Vanessa Marcotte was an only child who was born and raised in Massachusetts, but she wound up in New York City after landing a job with Google. While visiting her mother in Princeton on August 7, 2016, The 27-year-old went for a solo run along a rural road. She was due to catch a bus back to the Big Apple later that day, but never returned from her jog, prompting her concerned parents to call the police. A search was launched immediately. Sadly, Vanessa was found dead in a heavily wooded area less than a half-mile from her mother's house. She was naked, and her hands, feet, and face were burned. The young woman appeared to have been sexually assaulted and strangled. Her nose was broken, and she had suffered crushing injuries to her throat. According to some of the last witnesses who saw Vanessa alive, a vehicle appeared to be following her that afternoon. But nobody seems to have actually seen firsthand the massive struggle that cost the runner her life. The police launched a 24-hour tip line and advised the public to be on the lookout for an adult male with scratches, cuts, and bruises to his face and arms. They also disclosed that they believed Vanessa died during a random attack, rather than at the hands of someone she knew. In the meantime, DNA believed to have belonged to the killer was sent to the state lab for testing. The alleged murderer was finally captured in early 2017, when police took 31-year-old Angelo Colin Ortiz of Worcester, Massachusetts, into custody. He was a married father of 3 with no criminal history, making him seem like an unusual suspect. But his neighbors described him as perverted and claimed that he often made vulgar comments to people who lived in the area. Officers saw Colin Ortiz driving the exact same type of SUV that witnesses described seeing on the day of Vanessa's murder. Officers collected a DNA sample, which came back as a match to the killer's. The trial is ongoing as the defendant challenges a judge's decision to allow DNA evidence tying him to the crime scene to be presented as part of the prosecution's case. Number 2. Dawn BAJAK. Pedestrians and cyclists have just as much of a right to the road as those who are behind the wheel of a motor vehicle. But drivers often forget to consider this population when they hit the road, and it sometimes leads to tragedy. 50-year-old Dawn BAJAK was taking a routine morning jog just after Thanksgiving in 2020 when a vehicle ran a red light and fatally mowed her down. She was crossing the intersection that the driver, Flag Flora, failed to come to a stop at. Flora was ticketed for running a red light rather than a traffic infraction, which spared him from having to do any jail time. He pleaded no contest to the charge, and a judge suspended his license for a year and fined him $1,000. Dawn's family was disappointed by the outcome of the case, especially since Flora has an extensive history of traffic offenses, including a speeding ticket he received after the deadly collision. Her husband, Anthony, told local station WPTV that the man should have received a stronger sentence. "I would not want this pain on anyone," he told reporters, adding, "What my children, relatives, and I have endured is nothing short of sheer trauma, avoidable trauma." Anthony also said that he didn't understand why Flora chose to ignore basic traffic laws, and anyone who's lost a loved one in such a needless tragedy would probably agree. On the other hand, there's at least 2 sides to every story. The traffic investigator reportedly chose not to charge Flora because Dawn wasn't wearing reflective clothing during her early morning jog, and this was also a violation of the rules. Nevertheless, Flora took responsibility for the accident and apologized to Dawn's family. He also received the maximum punishment that was allowable under the offense he was charged with. Number 1. Christopher CERCE. Drivers and pedestrians don't always play nice when it comes to sharing the road, as a North Carolina man named Christopher CERCE recently learned. He was jogging on a roadside in Davidson County when a white pickup truck came barreling down the street with a trailer in tow. Christopher moved onto the grass to give the vehicle room to pass, but there was wood debris hanging off the side of the trailer, and it struck the jogger in the shoulder and neck. He fell to the ground with a large gash in his neck, which required 13 stitches. The ordeal also left the injured jogger in a neck brace. Christopher told local station WGHP that he wasn't even sure if the driver realized they had hit someone, and speculated that the motorist was perhaps distracted. Luckily, Christopher avoided hitting his head and remained conscious. He realized while walking home that he was more injured than he originally thought. There was a hole in his neck, and he was bleeding. The man made it home with the help of an aunt who lives nearby, and then took an ambulance to the hospital. doctors told Christopher that he was lucky he wasn't hurt worse, and that he could have ended up with a broken neck or windpipe, or a severed artery or vein. They ordered him to take a 6-week break from running, but the incident ruined outdoor running completely for him. It just feels too dangerous now, Christopher said, adding that non-drivers are entitled to use part of the road and should be able to do so safely. Thanks for watching. What's the worst thing that's happened to you on a run? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye!